Let's begin with a prayer, shall we? Father, we thank you for your goodness and your grace. We ask that we would indeed seek you first and foremost, that you would grow in our apprehension of who you are, and that we would love you more than anything else. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. We are now going to switch to our topic, a different topic series. I do these short little vignettes, and I've been doing a thing on the actual hands dealing with application, and so leadership we were looking at. I want to go back to what is actually going to be the 9th part of about a 11, 12-part series on cosmic beauty, and finish up this series that I did before. I did it actually 3 parts or several parts before, and then a second time. Now I'm going to kind of finish that series. But I regard this as another aspect of grasping, loving God in a contemplative way by looking at and contemplating, meditating, reflecting on his goodness in his created order. So it is his beauty, and even though the world is fallen, that we use to, as I use more and more intentionally, as a multiplier of worship and for adoration, and of course as an apologetic too, to clearly see, as we're going to be seeing today more and more, how marvelous and fearfully and wonderfully we were made. We're going to be looking at the human body. But just to get you a picture of where we were, we started with the scale of magnitude, and we're looking at the infinite patterns of the world and the various patterns in nature and so forth, and stretching our mind's eye about who God is in that way. And then we moved to the microcosm and looked at the inner life of the cell, your body's molecular machines and so forth. And we then also looked, you won't remember all this, of course, but it's all there on the Reflections Ministries YouTube channel, so you can always find this. And the new website's up, and we're populating it now and getting it. We're going to complete that very soon, getting it all as it needs to be. We moved from the micro to the midi, and the midi-cosm is the biosphere. It's that 12-mile thick sphere of life, a membrane of life around the world. And we see all kinds of things, from flowers to insects, to fish and jellyfish and so forth. We were looking at all kinds of marvels and wonders. We looked at the birds of paradise and these wonderful things, the puffer fish, and all kinds of things of that nature as well. And that's when we got into the conception to birth video, which I truly love, and it's something that's well worth a review from time to time. It's that excellent. Again, I showed it to you. It's about 15 minutes long, but it's the most astonishing portrait of how we are extraordinarily made, and it changes your entire view of that whole process. And then I began with the human body and how we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's where I'm going to pick up and continue in our little series here. So as we're looking at the human body, this is going to be, this is part 2, but actually I didn't finish part 1. But I'm going to show you where we were thus far. Again, you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And so this portrait of who we are, and the more we learn about our bodies, the more astonishing it really becomes. It's a matter of the praise of the living God and seeing him for who he truly is. So seeing him in that way makes all the difference in the world. So as I reflect upon these things here, our bodies and particles, we look briefly at that. And the idea, let me just get my little thing here because I have some things I want to use, how 100 trillion cells and 10,000 of these cells would fit on a pinhead. It's the architecture, the complexity of any one of your 100 trillion cells is so mind-boggling that if you developed it and made it as large as the city of Atlanta, it would be as complicated. It actually would be. Plumbing systems, systems, electronic systems, and chemical converters and factories and so forth. All kinds of things that are beyond imagination. Nobody understands how these things work. and how it forms and makes proteins and so forth. And so these cells, 100 trillion atoms in each of these cells, and so you're beyond imagination. And then the DNA, of course, we saw as well that DNA is the most densely packed, and it's the most elaborately detailed, the assembly of information in the entire universe. Nothing's like it. The more we learn about it, the more astonishing it becomes, because the DNA in one of your cells, 6 feet, if you teased it out that long, no one knows how it's all packed in. When you're talking about how incomprehensibly small the cell is, and for 6 feet of this stuff to be packed in, 3.2 billion nucleotide pairs, and information is found along those pairs because of the organization of the nucleotides. It's astonishing. It's the equivalent to 1,600-page books, where if the cytosine, thymine, guanine, and thymine actually form words. They actually form code. It's more sophisticated than our coding system. Where does this come from? You can't get complex information from randomness. And so, for example, volume 345 might describe this particular cell, volume 917, that cell. Then we also looked at the integumentary system, which is your skin, the largest organ. It's 8 to 9 pounds, 2 square yards of waterproofing, we're 60% fluids. The astonishment about your skin as well, and all these details, 45 miles of nerves there. Then we looked at this, I love this extreme, the muscular system, and we saw how these 600 plus muscles which work so beautifully together in composing 40% of our weight. And now we come up to the skeletal system, and that's where we left off. So I want to change the material here and go to another one here. So I'm going to go back to that and go to part 2, rather part 1. And this is part 1. Yeah. And I want to pick up where I left off with the skeletal system. So this will be fun. I hope you'll enjoy this. Again, the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn about your maker, and the more you are amazed and astonished. That is great. So I use science, technology, in a doxological way. What's doxological? You know the doxology. What does that mean? Yes, it means glory. Doxos means glory. And so it's the glory of God, you see. And the more you see and train yourself to see the beauty that you're immersed in, whether it's trees or the human figure, whatever, the glory of God becomes more evident. Now I'm going to be looking at the glory of God, in this case, in the skeletal system, that superstructure that supports the musculature. And it's entirely another complex, intricate, and fascinating system. And that these are not mere individual components, but rather they're subsets of a highly integrated, constantly changing system that for most people works perfectly for 70 to 100 years. But what if you didn't have bones, you see? You'd be like this New Zealand deep sea blobfish. He looks like he has a big nose, doesn't he? And little eyes. It's fabulous. It's just a nasty-looking thing. But without bones, though, this wouldn't be a bad picture of what you'd look like. You'd flop around like a Raggedy Ann doll, you see. And so you couldn't be able to stand or walk or even stand up in a chair. I cannot resist this. I have to show you this. This is something from the far side here. You didn't know where boneless chicken came from, did you? Boneless chicken. There's a chicken ranch, and here's where they are. See, there they are. You see, laying around there. They're just boneless chicken. Only he would come up with that crazy idea. I'm pretty confident about that. But let me go back to where we were. So we see that these amazing bones that we have, though, that through the bone has come to symbolize death at Halloween and costumes. Isn't it interesting how that becomes a symbol of that? The surgeon knows that the symbol lies because the skeleton is actually a growing organ. When bone is cut, it bleeds. Most amazing of all, when it breaks, it heals itself. It's self-repairing. When you just stop and think of the analogy of what we can make in comparison to this, It transcends anything that we can actually retro-engineer at all. It heals itself. Perhaps an engineer will someday develop a substance as strong and light as efficient in bones, but what engineer could devise a substance like bone that can grow continuously and lubricate itself as well, and require no shutdown time and repair itself when damage occurs? When you just stop and think, just a little modest reflection, just scratch the surface, and you realize how amazing it becomes. Indeed, no scientific researcher has yet discovered a material as well suited for the body's needs as bone, which comprises only 1/5 of our body weight. And in 1867, an engineer demonstrated that the arrangement of bone cells forms the lightest structure made of the least material to support the body's weight. And that's still demonstrable. So it's an engineering marvel, because the material and structure of bone is amazing in comparison to wood, for example. Bone can withstand greater pulling tension than wood, and significantly higher compression forces as well. A wooden pole for a vaulter would quickly snap, you see, but this would not. Steel, which can absorb both forces well, is 3 times the weight of bone and would burden us down. But pound for pound, bone is stronger than steel. It's 3 times the weight of bone, but it's pound for pound weaker. Steel is weaker than bone. You go work that out. It's an astonishment when you think about it. Indeed, bone is as strong as granite in compression, and 25 times stronger than granite under tension. A force as demonstrated by these 2 dogs pulling apart this poor student's term paper. But the idea of that's the tension, pulling it apart, far better than granite in that respect. And when we look at this, the adult human has 206 bones. But it's 40% decreased since infancy due to the fusion of adjacent bones. You see, babies are born with 300 bones. And then they fuse together, like, for example, the ones in your skull. And so bones are a composition of mineral crystals, and mostly calcium and phosphorus, collagen, and cells. And there's a blood cell factory. Bone is alive. It spends its days constantly changing, flowing, correcting, and shifting. It's like a river as well as a rock. The more you learn about it, the more astonishing it becomes. The core of many bones contains marrow, which is a remarkable blood factory that turns out a trillion cells daily. And that's hard to imagine, because what's involved in creating a cell boggles the imagination. It also produces red blood cells. So the red blood cells with a lifespan of 120 days, then blood platelets, which have a lifespan of 6 days, and then the white blood cells, which only about 1 day. So it's quite remarkable, just the difference. And there's always a reason for this, you see. Ain't evolution marvelous? You realize how stupid that is. To try to realize how exquisitely complex it is, just start looking at this, tease it out, and it just staggers the imagination again. The economical body takes this stress-bearing bone and hollows it out using a weight-saving architectural principle it took millennia to discover, and it then fills the vacant space in the center with an efficient red blood cell factory that turns out 1 trillion new cells per day. Bone sheathes lives. And there's constantly being remodeled. So these osteoclasts, the bones I carried into this room minutes ago, are different from the ones you're going to carry out from the room. You see, they're constantly changing. These osteoclasts scavenge each bit of bone 1 cell at a time, and they tunnel through bone as easily as moles go through a lawn. They open up holes for the blasts to fill, and the blasts then rejuvenate. And then they deposit a new supply of healthy fiber. And then this class cell leads a kamikaze kind of life because it bores through granite with such a verve that it burns out after 48 hours and is itself escorted away as waste. And then the clasts are large, packed with average of 10 to 30 nuclei, as if they needed all the instructions they can get for their sensitive task. An old bone is renewed, blasts factor into their design, necessary adjustments for stress, and all bone engine elements are arranged in perfectly engineered, intersecting lines of stress like girders on a steel bridge. The more you learn about it, the more wonderful it becomes. Well, over the years, your skeleton will be replaced about every 7 years. Of course, you don't have any of the cells you had 7 years ago. They're all different. And so you're not, what are you? You're not the same body, but yet there's a memory, there's a continuity. It's the astonishing nature of this as being one who is a material, physical being, but also a spiritual being as well. Bone composition is made from a matrix of hard minerals built and maintained by bone cells. Now, if you removed the minerals and kept the cells, you could actually tie your bones in a knot. So these minerals give it its hardness. And there's this synovial fluid joint lubrication. I love this. At the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge, England, a team of chemists and engineers compared the frictional properties of the cartilage lining our joints with that of materials the engineers use in artificial hips. And initially, they calculated that the friction present in the knee of an ox was 1/5 that of highly polished metal, about the same as the friction of ice on ice. It did not seem possible that biology could offer a joint 5 times more efficient than anything engineering science had ever achieved. And they searched further and found that joint cartilage is filled with tiny channels full of this synovial fluid. The cartilage is compressible. As a joint moves, the part of the cartilage bearing the strain compresses, causing jets of fluid to be forced out. Force pressure lubrication, and it lifts the two surfaces apart. So when the joint moves further, a different part of the surface bears the stress. Fluid in the new area squires out, while the area just relieved of pressure expands and sucks the fluid in. It's a complicated system. Thus, in active movement, the joint surfaces do not really touch, but they float on jets of fluid. And the engineers were astonished, for boundary lubrication and pressure lubrication were recent developments in the engineering, or so they had thought. But it's so sophisticated, it boggles the imagination. Now, a quick look, and I'm just scratching the surface, of course. How can you do more? You could look at any one of these things and take the rest of your life and to study and to just kind of a deep dive. Yes, Jeff? Yeah.
So it's replaced every 7 years. What's the implication it makes,
Yeah, that's the problem with the aging process, of course, and then osteoporosis and all these things where the bones get less and less capable because of the decline in the system as it is. It's an amazing thing how the growth process, and then there's this birth, growth, decay, and death. We know that that's a part of the process, but it's a depressing thing to see in a fallen world that you just don't sustain it, you see. It's amazing how well it works as long as it does work. But we're making it do things that really we would be hard-pressed to let anything else try to function. So it's the sadness of seeing this diminishment because of the aging process, where they stop replicating, they stop duplicating, and so the aging process sets in. These special cells at the end of the chromosomes stop functioning. These telomeres, they call them. And when the telomeres are not there anymore, it doesn't have instructions for reproducing the cell. So there's a diminishment that takes place. It's all hardwired. What would we be like if the fall hadn't occurred? Always an interesting speculation. Your body would have been such that it would not have died. It's hard for us to even begin to grasp what it was like, but we can say this, though. Wait till you see yourselves when you're resurrected. If this is impressive, and it is, wait till you see your resurrected self.
We have physical bodies in heaven.
You will have a body, what I call it, glorified flesh. by which I mean that it's the same body and yet it's a different body, and there's a mystery involved in that. When you really tease out the implications, actually that's why I put the resurrected body as one of the chapters in my very first book, which was called God, I Don't Understand. Now, some of you know that I always say that when the book first came out and you looked at the spine, it said, God, I Don't Understand, Boa. Yeah. It was dealing with mysteries. So I started with the fact that just as a dog can't grasp what it is to read a newspaper, you can teach it to fetch a newspaper, but you sure can't teach it to read the thing. And it has no category for what you're doing, does it? It can't imagine what you're doing. From its point of view, it thinks that you should just at least play with it or chew on it or do something with it, but just to look at it, because it has no category. And so it is as well. There are some eye hasn't seen or ear heard, nor has entered into the heart of man all that he's prepared for us, but it's going to be most impressive. And in a category where you now have a resurrected body, in a resurrected world where your experience of space and time will be dramatically different, much enhanced. They will serve you rather than right now, time. It diminishes us. I just found out yesterday about a loss of a beloved friend, and immediately my mind, I don't know what happens to you, but you think about the last time you were with him, you see, and you wanted to make sure you had closure and all that. But this isn't the way it was meant to be. But the time will come, there will be no more death and sorrow and pain and suffering, and God will sustain us at all times. All things He will sustain us. That's a whole discussion itself. But so we see, though, the morbidity of decrepitude that creeps in our lives, and that's why I say age conspires with God to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. But now I'm moving back into the circulatory system, so a cardiovascular system, rather. So as we consider the various ways that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, this is another wonder, a marvel. You can predict from having taken a cursory look at the other body systems that it reflects astonishing complexity, extraordinary engineering. Scores of books, of course, have been written about this system alone. It's not completely understood by any stretch. The human body, as this image reveals, contains about 60,000 miles of blood vessels. And this represents a distance of nearly 2.5 times around the Earth at the equator. That's how many blood vessels you've got. How does that all packed in there? And how each one works, and each is a marvel of engineering and structure and complexity on its own right. This pell-mell journey, even to the extremity of the big toe, lasts a mere 20 seconds around the body. An average red cell endures the cycle of loading and unloading and jostling through the body for 500,000 round trips over 4 months. And in one final journey, then it goes to the spleen. And that's when the battered cell is stripped bare by scavenger cells and recycled into new cells. So it's constantly being repaired. Even now, death is at work, but God has processes that He's built in that keep us alive a lot longer than we otherwise would have been in a fallen world like this. 300 billion such red cells die daily, replaced every day, leaving behind various parts to reincarnate in the hair follicle or taste bud. The circulatory effort is so dynamic that each blood cell returns back to its cardiac starting place every minute. And with a 120-day lifespan of a red blood cell isn't all that glamorous. It runs around in a circle 200,000 times, only be squished by the spleen on the next trip. But that's how it works. So, but look at this massive pipeline exists inside of each of them. It has to service 100 trillion cells in the human body. Endless supply of oxygen, amino acids, nitrogen, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sugars, lipids, cholesterols, and hormones. All these are carried by the blood, you see, into the arteries, and it then rejuvenates all the cells. It reaches all the cells of the body. When you work that one out, the capillary system is so astonishing. And it has to do an exchange. And so it's going to give them oxygen and take away what? carbon dioxide. So it's the other side of the coin there. It gets rid of refuse and exhaust gases, and uric acid and worn out chemicals and slurry pipeline. It's like, it's incredible. 5 or 6 quarts for 100 trillion cells, and that's what works this out. Beyond comprehension, how it constantly rejuvenates at all times. It is constantly an exchange of every one of your cells is somehow touched by the blood. How is that possible? You work that one out. It just, the more you think about it, the more astonishing it becomes, at least so it is for me. So it's an ocean of living water. A speck of blood the size of this asterisk that you can see up there. That if you had an asterisk that's on print, that's a tiny little bit of speck of blood right there. And it would contain about 5 million red cells, 300,000 platelets, and 7,000 white cells. The fluid is like an ocean stocked with living matter, like virtually every system in the human body. It's astonishing both at the micro and the macro levels. And this is the human skull, which is covered with veins. The brain requires 20% of the body's blood. And in this image, the preponderance of blood supply, where do you see it? Especially the sensitive nose, lips, and ears. But just the structure of looking at how you wire that and make it function and work in such a way, again, staggers the imagination. 7% of your body weight is blood. So it's to look at this human arm of veins. The fingerprints are known to be unique to each individual. A little known fact is that human circulatory systems are also absolutely unique to the individual. This 2008 Times Online article reports why veins could replace fingerprints and retinas as the most secure form of ID. So yours and my uniqueness far extends beyond our fingerprints and retinas and even circulatory system to areas of personality, temperament, and genetic code. And there'll never be another one like you. And you are meant, remember, to reflect and refract the glory of God in a way no one else can. So it's a purpose that you have. And then, of course, we look at the human heart. We can't forget about this key component. Every day, uncomplaining, this 10-ounce muscle contracts 100,000 times, nary missing a beat, over the lifetime of faithful service. These 2 self-lubricating, self-regulating high-capacity pumps beat 2.5 billion times and pump 60 million gallons of blood without pausing to rest. I'll let you work on that, you see. You don't have any time for resting. Just think about what that does. An average water tower, without rest, an average water tower holds about 150,000 gallons of water. We're talking about 60 million gallons pumped by the heart. That's 400 water towers worth of blood that you're pumping out in your lifetime. It's an astonishment when you think about this. And the heart design specifications, if an engineer were to create a list of design specs for the human heart, it would minimally include these things. You have to have a fluid pump with a 75-year life expectancy, 2,500,000 cycles, that no maintenance or lubrication or spare parts are required, that the outputs must vary between 0.25 horsepower at rest and short bursts of 1 horsepower determined by such factors as stress and exercise. The weight's not to exceed 10.5 ounces, 300 grams. A capacity, 2,000 gallons per day. Valves each to operate 4,000 to 5,000 times per hour. When you work it out, it's extraordinary how extraordinary the ordinary person is, as George Will put it. You see, it is how extraordinary you really are. So when we think about that, you've created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I'm praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And as I like to put it here, if we think the physical body is marvelous, wait until you see the resurrected body. So let me see, we have 10. So I'm going to do another system now. But now I have to go to part 2. So you have to give me an opportunity here. So we're going to shift to go to part 2 here. And yes,
One comment on the circulatory system.
yes,
Of course, we have a carotid artery on either side of our neck. They serve different parts of our brain. When I had a stroke 11 years ago, the carotid artery on the left side shut down. The one on the right side immediately
knew that.
reprogrammed to supply blood to the other side of the brain that it doesn't normally serve.
So it was immediately able to respond
Yeah.
to that required need.
Yeah, even though one was shut down, the other one then took over and supplied the area normally supplied by the first one. Try to explain that.
That's incredible. Yeah. How can you explain that? You can't. I'm going to go, but I'm on part 2. But I realized that I have to finish up part 1. Because, see, I didn't finish up part 1 because there's 2 more systems. It's the skeletal system. Well, let me just go ahead and do this. So that means I have to go back to part 1 and go to that. So that was a little tricky in forcing me to do this. Let me just get it right here. So let's see. This is part 1, right? Let's see. I got the skeletal system. I got the cardiovascular. Okay, while we're asking questions here, I think, so with the next one after the skeletal and then the cardiovascular system, let me go to part 2. Okay, that was right.
You know,
George Will, yeah.
is an atheist.
It's the strangest thought when you really chew on that. You know, you wonder about what that's like and how that could be. We're going to go to the sensory system is what we're going to be doing. That's what we've got. You see, the more you look at this, the burden of proof is more and more on you to show why this or how neo-Darwinism, which is basically mutations in natural selection, could provide any of this, because it requires anticipation. And they're always cheating. They're always ascribing a teleology, you see, but they don't have a basis for guessing that, oh, it'll be like this. I know it's not going to work right now, but when enough of these mutations, and eventually it'll form this system. No, that's promissory materialism. It's not going to do that because it can't anticipate the future. If it doesn't work now, so if you even had a wing bud, macro mutations that produced a wing bud, what good would that do? It wouldn't help the survival, would it? So eventually, what happens then with natural selection was that it would be that mutation would be eliminated because it's not useful for survival. So it's a very conservative system. That's why you'd never evolve beyond a sponge. Sponges survive very well, you see. In fact, even smaller things than that. My point is, it doesn't have a basis for that. And because you can't anticipate. So these are complex systems that all have to work in a simultaneous manner. I think it comes down really to the Romans 1 idea, and I think I'm prompted to share this thought with you. Let me go off of that for a minute. If I go to Romans 1, what you have is God's eternal powers, the divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they're without excuse. Even though they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations. Their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image of corruptible man, birds, and four-footed creatures and flying things. Therefore, God gave them over in their hearts. You see, so what happened is spiritual darkness was the first, and that in turn. So it was a spiritual darkness in Romans 1. That's what it was. It was not the evidence. It wasn't a lack of evidence. It was a choice not to buy it, to suppress the truth in unrighteousness. But they know very well, because they are bearers of the image of God, there's got to be more than that. And the spiritual darkness then produced an intellectual darkness as a consequence, which led then finally to moral decadence. So that's just the process. So that it's not a neutral matter. And this is why I said before that there are 2 kinds of people in the world: those who seek to know God and those who seek to avoid him. And both will succeed in the end. So it's an important principle to realize that ultimately you're going to be in this situation where, let me just get my notes out here, where you get to choose. How do you respond to these things? How do you respond to these truths that we have? Let me go back and get my little system here. So does that make sense to you, though? I'm hoping it, yeah. It's just the nature of all this is beyond imagination. I mean, now I'm going to get my little place.
Your Romans 1 description seems like the application process for a university president.
Yeah. The application process, you're right about that. I'm going to find where I left off here. Any other thoughts about this? Because it's an astonishment when you really stop and think about how marvelous we are made, and the more we learn about it. I know a lot of physicians, people who, when they're in medical school, came to faith because the obvious nature. One person when it was an autopsy, but the point is, others do not. It's not a question of the evidence. It's a question of how do you respond to it. And then there comes down to the question of a deeper issue than just evidence. It is, in fact, autonomy. Do I want to bow to if there is a God, I have to bow the knee to him, and I am no longer the autonomous center of my world. And so my will be done versus thy will be done becomes the spiritual reason by which some people suppress the truth in unrighteousness. I hope that makes sense to you, but that's how I see it more and more, the nature of this. We have a few more minutes, so I'm going to look at the sensory system. And go into this. This is an amazing thing here. Let me see. Work design. Where am I here? Okay. This was a bit tricky because I had to get part 2 here. I'm getting my notes here. Okay, here we go. Yes, this is fun. This is fun stuff. Obviously, much of this will have to be edited, as you can see. Okay, here we go. The sensory system. All right, I got my little notes here. Okay. Now we're going to explore the marvels of the multifaceted human sensory system. I have a lot of more senses in my list than most people do, by the way. I can't resist showing this to you. Let's see if I can find it here. I have miscellaneous. I would have it under illustrations, and I think I would have the senses here. It's kind of fun. Let me see. Maybe I put it here. Yeah, I think I did, yeah. I sort of had it there. Oh, it's a neat list, too. Bear with me here. I know. I'm running out of time. We're all running out of time, though. We're all out of time. So don't worry about that. But this is my little list of the 5 senses. So you got the 5 senses here. You have sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. But others have recognized these extra senses, proprioception, nociception, and so forth. Then I've added a lot more. I have things like voyeurception. It's awareness of another's gaze without seeing it. You know I'm right. Suddenly you know someone's looking at you. And they catch you looking at them. But it was from behind their head. How did they know? I claim that that's a capacity that transcends the 5 senses. Voyeurception is another one, where it's amazing how people, a spouse can know not voyeurism rather, but it would be what do I call that? It's kind of fun. It's rovioception. Yeah, I came up with that name. The roving eye. Suddenly she knows he's looking at somebody. She knows it even before she's not even seeing it, but he's doing it. You see, and catches him, and he gets caught. You see how that works? How does that work? Scientia procul, I made that one up. Sounds like a nice Latin name. Means knowledge at a distance. And there are times when I know for sure someone has just died or something has happened, and you know it. And there are certain things like that. You are more amazing than any list of senses could ever begin to imagine. But let's just start with the ones we know, and we only have a couple minutes. We'll start with this. Your sight. Arguably the most complex subsystem of the sensory system, sight provides us with critical ways to understand, navigate, and explore our world, and to enjoy its immense natural beauty. But the retina's rods and cones, a complexity of perceptual cells, staggers the imagination. When you look at the complexity, in humans, 127 million cells called rods and cones line up in rows as the, quote, seeing elements that receive light and transmit message to the brain. And rods are slender and graceful tentacles that reach toward light. And the bulbous cones they can be excited by one single photon of light. So you have this view of the brain here, top down. 7 million cones for color and vision and fine detail. You begin to study these things and look at their complexity. Again, it's an amazement. And there are 1 million nerve fibers on each of the side, and it's cross-wired, so that the right eye goes to the opposite lobe. And so a cross-wiring takes place here as well. And in the center, the image is reconstructed in a way that we, quote, see it. And so the retina also contains 120 million rods for dim night and peripheral vision. And they take continuous pictures under light conditions that can vary by a factor of 10 billion. So the visual cortex is a marvel and a wonder. No easy task. 1 billion messages a second stream in from the retina. Only in the last few years have scientists gained a glimpse of how the visual cortex sorts out these electrical systems by observing the process in anesthetized animals, usually cats or monkeys. To grasp this multitude of bits of data that 1 billion messages a second represents, consider this palette of dollars representing $1 billion, and that per second, that human eyes are capable of seeing more than 1 million simultaneous visual impressions and can distinguish somewhere between 8 to 10 million gradations of color. You work that out. It is beyond imagination. And then the shades of gray vertical stripes, 500 shades of gray we can recognize. So it's really an amazing. I will stop with this though, because this reminds me of optical illusion. Now you're going to see here that in the next one here, if you put this line here, you see, but you see. There's a gradation. There's a gradation between the second and the third, but when you put the line there, they're the same color. So your mind is tricked by that. It's an interesting thing. There you see it, and there you don't. It changes the rules. Because optical illusions I love because they reveal all kinds of ways in which our minds are trying to cogitate and process these bizarre things that we see in the world. We'll pick up next week then, and I'm going to look at the systems in the body that we're going to look at let me make sure I've got the right ones here. Yeah, turn that off there. So we're going to be looking at, after the sensory system, each of those, and then a word about quite a few of those, and then a word about the brain itself, the neurological system itself. So my desire is for us to just enhance our vision of what God is about, and to get a sense of His beauty and His glory and His excellence. So this is, I know, disjointed a bit today because it was a crazy combination of two presentations that I couldn't organize together because I didn't leave off at the right place last time. But you get the idea. What I want you to do by way of application, though, is to, when you drive back, start looking more and more intently at the beauty that your guides have been granted you to be able to see, and the capacity that we have of every day being a great gift and a great treasure. And you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and you are made for a purpose. You're not some accidental cosmic accident, but rather you are a person who is meant for his purposes. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your love and grace, your care, your provision, your mercy, which is an astonishment to us. We ask that you would guide us into all truth. Your word is truth. Amen.